Welcome back to the forum. We're excited to be now having discussions with Bassam, Chaïtou and Robert Devereux on private and public collections, building an African art collection of contemporary art. I'll give them brief introductions because they clearly don't need introductions, but so. Bassam started his career in France in the finance field, in international banking at BNP Paribas and international management and consulting at Ernst & Young. He later relocated to Senegal to devote himself to the development of a family business in the steel industry. He started his collection assembling over the past 15 years 300 works by Senegalese artists. Then we have Robert Devereux. After graduating from the University of Cambridge, Robert Devereux worked with the Amnesty International and Macmillan Publishers before joining Virgin in 1980 as Richard Branson's partner. Robert established a charity, the African Art Trust, in 2011, which through its grant making aims to support the livelihood of professional practicing artists producing art in Africa. I'd like to welcome Bassam and Robert. And also hosting this panel we have our program director, Koyo. No presentation. No introduction either, so welcome our guests. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Bonsoir pour ceux qui parlent français. Je sais qu'il y en a quelques-uns dans la salle. Be indulgent with my English. I will try to make all the presentation in English. And I hope to share this experience with all of yourself. I don't know how many people speak French in the room, but I will make it, okay, good, 1 or 2 or 3 persons. So, I'm going to speak about building a private collection. I'm really trying to make it interesting. So when Koyo asked me, I found because something art, it's really difficult, but I will try because it's very difficult to speak of 15 years of collecting in 15 minutes, you told me, Koyo? I don't know, 15. I said, okay, 1 minute per year is going to be really something difficult to make, and let's try to make it. So I said, take it another way. If I have just after 15 years of collecting, find just 6 words. 6 words to speak about the collection. What should be these words which will came obviously to my mind? And so 300 works, 50 artists, 1 country. I'm only collecting Senegal. In 6 words. The words who came, obviously, it was these ones. 1, a collection should be deep-rooted in the history of a country. 2, modernity. 3, madness. Don't question me now what is madness. We will come to it after. Pivotal work, very important thing in a collection. Trajectory, and light and shadow. So I'm going to make some 6 snapshots on the collection, really simple snapshots, and I will share it by illustrating all works from my collection. I'm not going to show 300 works. I'm doing something like 15 or 20 works in the collection, but it will give the general idea of how collecting contemporary art is made by somebody who is living in Senegal, living in Africa, working in Africa, who has been born in Africa, even if he has traveled a lot in all the parts of the world. So this is the way I will. Let's start by deep-rooted. A people without knowledge of history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. This is very important. The first thing I was looking in the collection is to have something which is in-depth history. History of a country, which is Senegal, history of the art of the country, or history of a specific artist within the country. And I try to illustrate this by this work of Cherif Thiam. People perhaps don't know Cherif Thiam in the room, but Cherif Thiam is, let's say, one artist of the very first generation of Senegal. He is part of what people called École de Dakar. What's really important about Cherif Thiam is this an artist which is still practicing until today. He has 50 years of practicing. But what's really important for me, it was to find his China ink works of the beginning. China ink works like this one, Recherche du Féticheur it has been exhibited at Grand Palais in 1974, and it took me 5 years to find it. Finding works of the 1970s from Senegal, which is the beginning of École de Dakar, is something impossible. I know there are some people from galleries in Senegal here. They know that you cannot find this kind of work. Or this other one, which is a tree called Goyu Biram Pumba, which is a baobab, which is very high significance of Senegalese legends. Well, you can find this baobab paint in the 80s, in the 90s, because he kept making the same painting on a very long period. But finding the first work, which is a matrix which has generated all the others, on all this year, it was very, very difficult to find. If I tell you how I found this kind of works, it was not in a gallery, it was not in a fair, it was not in an exhibit. I found it somewhere one day after 5 years of knowing Sharif Thiam, when I went to his house and I told him, just I wanted to see a portfolio was under his bed. He has hidden it, and it was just there, and it had inside it 10 works of the 1970, which are a real treasure for history. I think if you look at Baobab, which is the work down, the only other one is in the collection of government of Senegal, in the patrimoine of the state. So finding works is very important, but finding in the real period at the beginning is much more important. We cannot speak of history of art of Senegal without saying 2 words on Pierre Lodz. Pierre Lodz, I think all people interested in art know him. He's a French person who has lived in Africa. He started in the 1950s in Brazzaville. He founded the Poto Poto School, that I think all of you know. And then he came to Senegal in the 1960s, recruited by Léopold Sédar Senghor, the president, in order to found another school, which is the École de Dakar School. He's very important because he really had a big influence on the first generation of artists with this, I don't know if you can share the ideas, but saying that people can make laissez-faire and people shouldn't master the technical drawings, and at the end we are just born artists. We don't become artists by mastering techniques. So this is something that he made in Congo for Poto Poto School and in Senegal. What I'm going to share here is something much more different. One day in a Senegalese atelier of an artist, I found this work. I said, wow, this is a Poto Poto School work. It looks like tango, if you know tango from Poto Poto School, or you look at Goten. This doesn't look like École de Dakar. In fact, this work has been made. It was the only time in 15 years that I found the influence of Poto Poto School on École de Dakar. This work looked like completely all the style of Poto Poto School, and it was being signed by Kata Diallo in the 1970s, which is an artist of the first generation of Senegal. So this was the proof that somewhere, even if Pierre Lodz didn't want any influence on his École de Dakar, he wanted authenticity. In fact, the Poto Poto School has influenced some people from Dakar. I found only 2 works in 15 years who have this symbol. 3, École de Dakar, this is the kind of work in the 1970s. Or this one, Amadou Seck and Diatta Seck are 2 brothers. They tried to, let's say, they considered themselves as they were inheritors of, let's say, the big traditional art of masks and sculpture. And they wanted not to copy this mask, not to make the same thing, but to invent something which is a new visual art, which is making some mask-like forms and some new decorative shapes. All this work, this is very representative of École de Dakar, very, very representative of this influence of the mask on the École de Dakar. And if you see it, there's no perspective, no volume, no depth. Senghor écoute les masques. I really like this figure. Senghor listening to the mask and not looking at the mask. It's very important, like if the mask has something, a message to give to them. And what's really important about Senghor, that all this first of École de Dakar is also a symbol of what we can call an official art made for illustrating the philosophy or poetics of Senghor. Alpha Walid Diallo, 1970. If I showed this figure, is that to see even in the first generation, some people were outside the official trajectory of the first École de Dakar. Alpha Walid Jallo was the only one who was making some portraits or monumental landscapes, and he was considering himself as history painter. Like if you look at Jean-Louis David in France, which were making this Napoleonic wars, he was considering himself somebody who have to illustrate all the history of Senegal. And this is very important. He was against the first École de Dakar, which is saying, well, why we have to go and go to the myths or legends. Let's go to the history of Senegal and illustrate it. And this is very important. Alpha Walid Jallo made a very big, if you look at this first one, has a very high historical level. Every detail of the costumes are well documented with the archives. These people are from all the countries. These are the first people from independence, from Guinea, from Mali, from Senegal, and all the details of the costume, of the figures. This is between history and art. Alpha Walid Jallo was not in the first. In fact, he was not supported by École de Dakar. He died in a very poor situation. And I tried to save all these works, and I found some of these works were documented by Alpha Walid Jallo, which is 300 years of history of Senegal by his hands. It's a real treasure. Modernity. Ibn Jai, I have no desire to be fashionable. Certain people seeking exotic thrill expect me to serve them folklore. I refuse to do it. Ibn Jai. For me, Ibn Jai is a friend, late Ibn Jai. He is perhaps, and I really support and defend this idea, the biggest, the most important painter of Senegal. More than this, one of the 5 more important painters of all Black Africa. This one has founded a modernity in the contemporary art of Senegal. He is at the same level than Ernest Mankoba of South Africa. I show some works of Ernest Mankoba in one gallery. It's very, very good to see them there. He's the same level of Malangatana from Mozambique, or Bogosian from Ethiopia, or Sarai. These 5 or 6 men who has founded the contemporary, the modern art in Africa, and not the primitive art of Africa. I went to the house of Ibn Jai on 10 years, every year before he dies. After 5 years of friendship with him, he offered me this book, Henri Faucillon, La vie difforme. And he told me, this book has been offered to him by, I don't remember if it Ossip Zatkin or Coutin, the 2 sculptors that he was formed with him. And he always kept reading this book. And he underlined a paragraph in this book, and he told me, just read this sentence, and you will understand my work. I undertake this praise of the hand as a duty of friendship is filled. When I start writing, I see minds who seek my mind. They are there. These tireless companions, by them, man takes contact with the hardness of thought. They impose a shape, an outline, or even a style. Ibn Jai was between the very rare people in Africa who thought in order to become authentic, you have to master the techniques of drawing, of perspective, of painting before going there. And this is very important to him. He made different thematics. One of the best known is Tabaski La Ronde à qui le tour. I acquired this work just when it came back from, I think it was Africa, short independence. The big show made in New York, in the MoMA, I think, by Okwe and Wezer. And when it came back, I just acquired it. How I acquired it, I will tell you the story after. It was something very, very difficult to have, but you will understand that sometimes friendship is very important. Sometimes art is not only a question of money. Sometimes art is something else. Tabaski, La Ronde qui tour, was one of these thematics. He made this for a period of 50 years, in 60s, in 70s, in 80s, in 90s. Even in 2000, I saw him making this kind of work. The Woman Who Cries, which is another thematic of him, the cry of a continent. Ram or the Spirit, something which is looking like Goya. Or the jazz thematic, and have many others I cannot just see. What's really about Ibn Jai is that he kept making the same thematics in the 5 thematics. He had only these 5 thematics: jazz, Tabaski, portrait, cry of a continent, on many different years. And I will just give now a look at this work of Seni Kabara. Seni Awa Kamara is also collected in my collection. She is there. You know, all people know Seni Awa Kamara since she had been in the big exhibition called Magicien de la Terre in Centre Pompidou. What was interesting for me is what Ibn Jai can think of the work of Seni Kamara. And I remembered this. Be on guard against those who require you to be African before being painters, those who in the name of authenticity, which remain to be defined, continue to want to preserve you in exotic garden. I'm not against primitivism in Africa. They are there. Seni Awa Kamara is the only artist of Senegal who is in this primitive, let's say, authentic, autodidact school. But what's really important is that to show just close to Seni Awa Kamara some other works which are modern art also. This is what Magicien de la Terre hasn't made, in fact. Magicien de la Terre was only focusing on some authentic works, what is authentic in Africa. And this is the debate in 10 years, so we're not entering in this. What's really important is that in my collection, you will find Seni Awa Kamara, and this one is a very important one. It's not the small potteries that you have, 20, 30, it's ones that mean more than 1 meter, but you have also Suleiman Keita, which is a student of Ibn Jai, who is mastering the techniques, or Fode Kamara, who is another student by Paolucci, which is student of Ibn Jai, so mastering really the techniques. This work has been made in 1989 in France for the bicentenary of revolution in France. And this work, it took me, I think, 6 months to take it back to Senegal because it was in a museum in France. And with the help of Fode, we just came it back because it's one of the master of his work. 3, is it okay? Not very fast, okay? Madness. When times are wise, poets are mad. Times are wise, this was under the negritude, the first generation, in fact. I'm going to speak about this man called El Hadji. El Hadji is a man of the 2nd generation. He made this kind of work, and this kind of work has been exhibited, I think, by Clementine Delis in Whitechapel Gallery in '95, when she made 7 stories about modern art in Africa. Because it is a key word, but they were exhibited alone, without any other from the 1st generation artists of Senegal, because we cannot understand El Hadji if we don't see the 1st generation of Senegal. The speech of El Hadji is how can he free let's say the art from the official discourse of the 1st generation, or all the guidelines given by the 1st generation. So he started like this by painting, if I go back, by painting with his feet. He made this 10 years. And he stopped this when the government has bought the first painting made with his feet. He stopped this and he started to make this kind of work using local jute sack, you know, this sacking containing rice. He just takes this local materials, and he started to make these works, which can look like mask if you look at it, but it is something else. He is freeing from all the guidelines from the 1st generation. He made also this kind of work, and he decided to sell this work at the price of a sack of rice. He went under when many people, if you go to Senegal, you have what was the official story of tapestry. You have a manufacturer of tapestry like Gobelin in France, like Aubusson. And we have a tapestry called Thiès, manufacturer of Thiès. And the work of this manufacturer of tapestry were very, very expensive. So in reaction with this, he went much far. His work were much more, let's say, technically advanced than those of manufacturer of Thiès, and he sold them at a very, very, very low price. Pivotal work, œuvre charnière. Okay, what is this? I understood that the attitude of the statues are attitude of dance, because African dance submits the body to a break in equilibrium in order to create another. Vidiba. This doesn't mean anything like this. What I'm looking for in fact, in the collection is how an artist can just start a new movement at 180 degrees shifting from all what he has made in the before. This is what I call œuvre charnière. And to illustrate this, I will speak about Vili Diba. Vili Diba is also an artist of the second generation. In the late 80s, he made this kind of works. All these works were, let's say, people who are living in the street, like the mentally ill or street vendors. And he made these colorful works on many years. And then in the 1991, this kind of work, which is Reneveni, came. It was something which has nothing to do with the others. What was really important is to see this work, which this work has been the beginning of an all new period of Vili Diba, which is going to last, I think it's lasting until now, 15 years. This one's the first one that he made. And when you discuss with Vili Diba, he tells you that, well, one day he was just thinking about what is Africanity and how can he make this in his works. So he has taken a leave of 3 months. He left his work as teacher in art school, and he went to the Museum of African Art, traditional African art in Dakar every day during 3 months, to see all the statues and understand what was the formal between the statues and to understand what is the essence of these statues. And after these 3 months, he made this work. He understood that what's really important in the traditional art of statues is that these statues are like dance. Verticality, balance was very important, and weight were very important in these traditional statues. And the dance, if you look at African dance, the center of gravity is just much near the ground than it is in valse or anything else. So this kept him, in order to represent the traditional art without representing mask, without representing sculptures, but in something different, and this was the starting work. This work is very, very, very important. It was the starting point of a whole period. It was a shifting point, and it was not to sell. I found it, in fact, one day when I went to Vili Diba house and was just looking around. I found this in his son's room, put there, and it was not to sell. It took me 1 year discussion with Vili Diba to take it, but I did it there. Pesanteur des silhouettes. 5, trajectory. Another thing is important. Sometimes artists make a complete pivotal thing, 180 degrees. Some other artists evolve. And it's really important that a collection shows this evolution. That's why I'm insisting on this point. You should have works on different periods of an artist, and you should also have the key work of one period, or this work which is going to make a new trajectory. So trajectory is something different. It's evolution, but by steps. And I will list it by Moussa Tine. Moussa Tine is also artist of second generation. He started in the 1990s. He was making works like this one. And he said that people wanted to touch his work because there was like a feeling of relief, but there was not. It was an illusion. So it gave him an idea. 8 years later, he started this kind of work. He put relief in his work. He made plywood. This is plywood on canvas, which is really in relief, in volume. But this period lasted only 1 year. 1 year after, he started this series of elevation. It's a K series of Moussa Tine, and it was going to last 10 years. He started to make some metal figures, really bolted in the background. And what's really important is that he made an evolution in techniques by now including these metals that he has, heating them before, hammering them before, and put them in the underground. But also his discourse around this has changed. It became a metaphysical discourse. He said, if you look behind the figures, you have a certain light which is in elevation. And for him, this elevation is elevation of spirit, and he put it like these figures, he calls them baifal, which is something that not really perhaps have meaning here in London, but in Senegal, by Fall are the followers of a religious guide, which is Sheikh Ibrafal. And this becomes something much more metaphysical for him. Not only evolution in techniques, but also evolution in the set. And he went one step further at the end. He just erased background. There's no background. He made metal background completely without anything, and it's completely metal. And he went much more further in his discourse of spirituality. So this is also important to understand from an international perspective. When we are collecting works, some works have another meaning locally, which can be social, religious, or something else. It's very important then to understand this work also by being in the local part. Last, but this is for debate, light and shadow. Everything that we see is a shadow cast by that which we don't see. I wanted to illustrate this by the only work of Ousmane Sow, which is in Senegal today, which is the Luther Nuba, and which is in the collection. Because Ousmane Sow is in the light today. He's very important, he deserves it. I show that the lot of people from Christie's or something, some work of Ousmane Sow are selling at a very high level today. I heard some figures. So I'm not illustrating this by Ousmane Sow. I'm illustrating this by Soli Cissé. Soli Cissé is also someone who has, from the third generation, who entered in, let's say, the light. There's some gatekeepers in the international, and they open the door, and Soli Cissé is one of these really key people that is working without any complex, just going to the international market. He was in Africa Remix late, and he's a very important actor which is in the light, and he deserves it. He is a very, very prolific, very, very interesting man, making installation, making many different works. What's really important is that he was in the light very early. He's very young. Ndarilo also is in the light today. What was really important for me is to speak people towards the shadow. And this is also important. Making collection, it means making some research. And some people are not in the light, not because they don't deserve it, not because they have less value than others, just because they don't want to sell their works. Djibril André Diop is a very, very, very old man sculptor, one of the first one making on iron. If people know Mustafa Dime, he is pioneer like Mustafa Dime, but he never exhibited. In fact, he exhibited once, I think, and we can find one of his sculptures here in the Yorkshire Park when he was invited in Africa 95. This man is not seeking any light. He doesn't want to sell, or he sells, but for a certain person like me sometimes. And he is invited in many international exhibits, but it is not always what he is seeking. But his work, he is making a work, I think he made something like 100 works on metal, all on different works, also on a metaphysical. And it's like Frédéric Brûlé-Babry, if you know, in Ivory Coast, making some different, but he is with another step. So what's really important is that Djibril André Diop is also a key. Sometimes in a collection, you should have lights. I'm very, very happy to have Ousmane Sow, to have Ndarilo, to have Soli Cissé, key names, Ibn Jai in the collection. But sometimes if you are a real collector, you have to go somewhere where light are not, where nobody has already put in the accent, or people who don't want, people are making real authentic art for them, and they don't want to exhibit it, but art should be exhibited one day. So it's also this kind of things that local people can make, is to go somewhere where nobody goes. But I think Djibril André Diop now is known, and to understand what is there, to understand what is really authentic. And if you look at the work of Djibril André Diop, these three works are completely different in terms of techniques. You will never find two works which are similar in Djibril André Diop. He is inventing himself every time. The one called La Famille has been exhibited, I think, at Grand Arche La Défense, in fact, once. It's very old work, but he is still evolving. So this is the end of the story for my collection. I hope it's not the end of the story. And I just will end with this by giving some hope that perhaps, yes, art, you can have people who are in the light, you should have people in the light, but some other are not in the light, and the hope is that art is very different. And as far as it remained like this, where you have some authenticity, not only, let's say, money, which is working, then we will be confident, we will be happy to collect, and we continue to collect. Thank you very much for listening to this.
Please, thank you so much, Bassam. Please join us here at, you could be more comfortable sitting maybe. Thank you for this very insightful introduction to your wonderful collection. As a Dakar-based person, I know Bassam's collection, and I always say that he's the only serious collector in Senegal. And he doesn't like that burden, but I like truth. So it was very important for us when we were building the focus on collection to invite Bassam to introduce what he's been doing over the last over 20 years. We've specifically focusing on collecting contemporary Senegalese art in a very systematic and scientific way, one must say. But we also have another guest here. He thinks maybe that he would escape speaking, but he will not. Hello, Robert, and I know that I would like to, you didn't prepare a presentation because this should be more conversational now. I would like you, if you have from collector to collector, from collector of contemporary African art to another, do you have any kind of reactions to Bassam's presentation and also about his, the organization or the orientation of his collection?
Well, I certainly do. And actually, I'm not going to make this, but I've got a few remarks to make. I also just want to tell you, there are going to be some images on the screen. I actually haven't seen the images. They were selected by my assistant. They bear no relation to the remarks I'm going to make. They're just there because they're more interesting than I am. And also, but if you ever want to stop them and ask a question, do. I may not be able to answer it. And also, I mean, when I'm talking anyhow, I don't really like monologues. I much prefer dialogue. So I'd much rather you stop me and question me or intervened in some way. But I mean, funny enough, the remarks that I was going to make really are an answer to your question, because you know, if clever curation is about, and if you do curate talks, I'm not sure whether you do, but if clever curation is about distinction, you couldn't have picked two more distinct collectors, because I guess, I mean, the first thing I would say is I'm not very comfortable with the word collector. I don't really, I mean, I am called a collector, and the reason I'm not terribly comfortable with the word collector is that it has kind of acquisitive and possessive, I think, connotations, which has very little to do with why I mean, for me, collecting is about an engagement, primarily with the artists and their work. So for me, collecting begins with the work. And consequently, for me, it's quite a random process. So my collection is extremely eclectic. Again, completely the opposite to Bassam's. It comes from all over Africa, although there is a strong focus on East and Southern Africa. And the reason for that is no more complicated than that's where I spend my time, and that's where I have a little bit more knowledge. I'm not an academic, I'm not a curator, I'm not an African, I don't live in Africa. I'm really just a very ordinary Englishman with a passion for the creative arts, who's channeled that passion into, well, for many, many years, visual arts, and in the last 10 years, more particularly, African art. So it was fascinating to see a collection that's been built with a much more purposeful, clear mandate, with a much more, with some academic underpinning. I mean, for me, collecting is really primarily an emotional experience. I mean, I can talk to a certain extent analytically and intellectually about work, but really, for me, work is about, collecting is about the engagement with the work and then with the artist. And in fact, when I buy work, I quite like not to have met the artist for a period of time, because I'm very easily seduced by artists. So once I've met an artist, I find that knowing them has a big influence on how I perceive their work. And I think that's a good thing. at a particular point in the process. But I actually quite like to get to know their work before I'm subjected to that influence. Then, of course, once I've met them, and which doesn't always happen, because I should think actually well over 2/3 of the art I own in my African collection is made by artists whom I haven't yet met. But then obviously the experience changes once you get to know the artist and actually get a much deeper and more profound appreciation of what it is that they're attempting to do. And again, I think one of the other common denominators of my kind of collecting, I mean, I collected nothing but British art for about 20 years, is that I'm primarily interested in young and emerging artists. And I think that's because for me it is about, it's about supporting people who are doing interesting, creative, innovative. I mean, groundbreaking is a big word because, of course, not all artists can break ground. And so I tend to for the most part, acquire work by young and emerging artists. And sometimes, both for financial and other reasons, once they've become too well established, I stop collecting them.
I'm really happy with the comment of
Yeah,
Robert.
please.
Because I think you put the point of the two ways of collecting art in Africa. It's like this, clearly. In fact, I started like you or any other international collectors. I didn't know the artist at the beginning. And I started to, at the beginning, when I have to choose, let's say, works from artists, it was emotional. And I had some little work, let's say, I have perhaps one of Musa or something. Then something changed. And I agree with you that you cannot make the same thing. If you want to collect African contemporary art, you cannot make what I make for all the countries in Africa, or you have to be a billionaire or something like this. But even money will not access you to make this, because it's time consuming. And it is something, as you said, which is becoming analytical, academic. It's something which is something like a research. But for me in Senegal, and I agree with you that I started like this, collecting some work, not knowing people, not going to atelier, not going and discussing with people. I thought that I was missing something. I couldn't make understand some of the work if I was not living there, if I was not speaking with the artist, and if I was not making this research, because at the end, when you go to Dakar, you don't have any museum, you don't have any art critics. So I have to be a museum, art critics, a researcher, even if you have some research on contemporary art in West Africa. Now, if one day I will expand my collection to go further than Senegal, if I decide like you, for instance, let's go and collect African between, I don't like this word, collecting African contemporary art, because what is African? It's not African. Why do I have to collect? But let's say if I find an analytical way to open Senegalese collection to some artist, then I will make like anybody. I will become an international collector based in Senegal, because I'm not based in South Africa. I'm not based in Congo. Then I will make a selection of some artists. How can I base my selection? I will take the big names, I don't know. I will say, okay, Elanatsui in Ghana, if I can afford it again, now he's out of in the market. I can take Twin 77, I can Eras Mankoba, I can think some names. And I will not make the same research, because it is time consuming. This is research, this is academic research. I didn't want to make it, in fact.
That's where I think one key word, and also one that we use in our lining of the panel, is passion. So I think that how much does passion, I mean, Robert said about his passion, but I know that you have a lot of passion behind your, acquisition strategy. And it cannot only be analytical, because as a collector, you don't, the collector that you are not acquiring work to give it for art criticism. So how much of a passion and how much of a engagement and support is driving your acquisitions?
Well, you cannot collect if you don't have passion.
Yeah.
Really, it's not possible to last in years after years. And if you you cannot take an artist in your collection if you don't feel anything with the work or something like this. It is not completely cold. It is very warm. I mean, works who enter the collection, they are not, you should feel something when you find the work. I mean, it's the first thing, because some some important artists are not in the collection because I don't feel anything with the work, whatever it is. But sometimes passion meet what is important in the history. And this is what's really important. If you can collect something which you have a very high feeling, and in the same times, your feeling is in, let's say, is converging with the importance of a work, whether it's historical work, then you are building something which is important. And I'm not saying, no, when you invite me, I think, generally I don't even want to speak about my collection, but you invited me so kindly and I came to speak about this, because I really like to be in the shadow. I'm making my work there, making this, nobody is asking me anything. When I made my exhibition in 2007, I had many people asking me to make the same exhibition outside. I haven't made it. And so passion is very key, I think, in what you are making. It is very, very important. And
I
otherwise,
ask this because, I mean, in opposition to what Robert
don't oppose
just
us every time.
in opposition what Robert just said about that he's acquiring work out of, he doesn't even need to know the artist in the beginning.
But this is good also.
Exactly, and that you linked your acquisition
yes.
very much to knowledge and also to proximity with the artist. So
it's important because if he can choose something which is special and something which is important at the same time, and if you are, but you can also acquire. I have many works that are not very important in the collection. You have it by passion, but they are not important, and history will not remain. These are important. What I said, you make. I think that's what you are making with everything with a passion, because it's taking time, it's taking money, it's taking whatever it is, and at the end, if passion meets importance, then this is a good thing.
Looking at knowing your collection, Bassam, I know that it's mainly painting and sculpture. And looking at the images of your part of your collection here, Robert, I also see more or less the same. So I wanted to ask both of you.
Yeah, although can I just actually interrupt, because one of the things that interests me about my African collection is that I've always said that I don't think I have a particularly good eye for photography. Of course, if you engage in contemporary African art, it's quite difficult. Well, I mean, why would one want to avoid photography? And in fact, I mean, there is a lot of photography in my collection, which I still don't think I'm necessarily, but I think it's an unavoidable and a wonderful part of what I encounter. So that was just a brief aside.
Yeah, but there is still quite, I mean, for instance, for you, Bassam, then maybe you have to answer that. There is a heavy weight on sculpture and painting. How are these the forms that you're interested in, or is it because maybe you don't really have the access or knowledge yet about photography and other art forms like video and maybe also immaterial forms? Or what is the reason behind that?
No, I don't have something like this saying I will not collect media or this media, whatever it is. I'm making it year after year. And I was not, at the beginning, wanting to make a collection or something which is big. But if you are speaking about photography, I think photography is very, very important in Africa today. Not only what we know, which is, let's say, the Malian photographs. All people know it, Seydou Keita, Malik Sidibe, but some others, treasures. So if I collect photographies, and in fact, I will collect photographies, it's only a question of time, of also, all this cost, so you have to go further and further. And because I was focusing on Senegal. Senegal was not very well known for photography. It was Mali mainly, or this was what all the international exhibit had put. But I found that, in fact, photograph in Senegal, they are even precursor than Mali. And it was much more difficult to find these photographs, because like Mama Kassé, Salah Kassé, Doudou Diop, all these people who have started in the beginning of last century in Saint Louis, you just don't find this kind of works. Well, I can go to Mali, because people have found the work. So there is it will take time. And it is sure that a collection should be complete. It should not focusing on one media, sculpture or painting. and it has to be extended. So next step, it will be extended to photography, but also to something else, which is a tapestry or even textile in one country. Because I'm based on one country, I can make this the whole media of this country. And so now photograph, and I think this is very, very, very important part of
something that I think was interesting also that transpires through both what you both said. I mean, Robert said he's only interested in young and emerging. We still have to
not only interested, but primarily.
That's good.
Primarily.
I will take the others.
We still have to sort of also frame what young and emerging is, because I have my own take about what young and emerging could be. And you build your collection now kind of transgenerational, you know. So, and can you talk a little bit more about what you consider young and emerging? Because you also said that as soon as they get too established, you depart them.
Yeah, that might, of course, just be for financial reasons. But well, I mean, what does young and emerging? Because I don't think young. I mean, young to me isn't necessarily anything to do with age. It's probably more to do with career and where an artist has got to in their career. But I think, and it isn't. I mean, it's definitely not a judgmental thing either. I mean, it simply, I think, reflects the fact that. And if we're going to talk at any point about the African Arts Trust and the connection that has with my collecting, which in fact is in some ways quite remote, because the trust very specifically doesn't buy work, is that it's really because, well, I suppose it starts. I mean, I've got barely a dead artist in my collection. That's because I suppose for me, it is about supporting the artists and the gallerists. I have to say, I mean, there obviously aren't a huge number of African galleries, but I spend a certain amount of the time when I'm in Africa talking to the artists about the importance of galleries, because I find, I don't know whether this is unified, that quite a lot of artists are suspicious about gallerists. I mean, they don't really quite understand why it is that as the creator of the work, they should have to give anything up to half the proceeds to a gallerist. But to my mind, and perhaps this is a Western model, perhaps it's not right, but to my mind, a gallerist is absolutely fundamental to the successful career of an artist, and not just as a means of access to market, but because a really great gallerist is a friend, a support, an editor, a guide, and all the rest of it. So, I mean, I actually do. I mean, I would never buy a work from a gallery that I didn't love, but I do also, part of my criteria for buying work is sometimes to support a gallery who I think is doing important things, or in themselves maybe young and emerging. Which hasn't answered your question at all, has it?
No. It does somehow. But it leads me to the next and last question, because we open to the floor. You are, Robert, you are doing what I call an act of decollecting. By selling your collection to establish an institution that supports artists and African projects. Can you tell, I mean, with the Ugandan Arts Trust, can you say something about that? I think most
what
people
about the trust and its establishment, and how it was established?
And the process of decollecting.
Well, funnily enough, I've never heard the word decollecting before. I think museums de-access, don't they, or something like that. But well, I mean, all that happened was, I mean, a number of years ago, for reasons that, to a certain extent, escape me, I decided that, there's so much I could say about the African Arts Trust, but very briefly, there's somebody who's spent quite a lot of their life involved in small NGOs. I don't really believe in charity and NGOs, so I then go and set up my own little foundation, which seems like a very contradictory thing to do. But I think the arts world is different. I mean, there are very few arts organizations anywhere in the world, even in the wealthy West, that actually survive on their own purely commercially. And so the African Arts, I decided that there was, it's hard enough to be an artist anywhere, but I think it is true that it is harder, not just in Africa, in many countries, but it's tough to be an artist in many African countries. And part of that reason is simply the lack of resources. The lack of, whether it's galleries, art schools, government funding, whatever it may be, there is a chronic lack of resource. So the African Arts Trust was really set up to address in a very, very small way that issue. And it needed some money. And I knew that nobody would give me any money. So I decided the only way I could actually afford to start the trust was to sell a big proportion of my British art collection, which is why I think Koyo calls it decollecting. So I sold about 450 works of primarily, but not exclusively, British art at the end of 2010, and used that money effectively to endow the trust, which now spends the proceeds on it. And it's a grant-making trust. It doesn't own or manage any of its own projects. And it really looks to support grassroots organisations that operate on the African continent. I mean, we will support foreign exchanges and shows and things that happen abroad, but primarily it's really to try and assist in creating sustainable long-term projects. We don't support individual artists for various reasons. And well, I mean, the reason is that why it also doesn't itself buy art, and that's because I do that in it personally as a collector. And I think it's quite important to keep the trust's activities and my personal activities quite separate from each other. So
thank you so much.
That's the story of decollecting, which I shall use, a word I shall use frequently now.
It is interesting. I mean, I know that you, Bassam, I think we can speak about it, that you also have a plan to endow your collection into a foundation to make it less private as a personal activity and a more kind of community into. What can you say about that?
I like this work of decollecting also, but in a term of, at the end, when you look of all this work is made, is it worth to keep it in one private part, or should it be public? And when you know that there's no museum, no foundation of art in some countries in Africa, even if people speak about it much more now, yes, sure, at the end, what was really private, which was really something which individual, is becoming more and more public, more and more shared, and it has to be shared, because at the end, this is, even if I bought them, they don't belong to me. This is a patrimony. This is really a patrimony of Senegal today. You have some works which is, if they decide to create a museum, you just have to put them there. So I'm looking to some works. There was a very important project of making a foundation or museum in Senegal, in a very good place, which was in Gorée Island. And it was a very, very good project. It was a former governor place, this called Relais de l'Espadon, people who know Gorée Island. And I like this idea to put the collection there, where you had so many, to put the beauties where something in an island would have so difficulties before. Mm-hmm. And the project has, normally, it has a founding. It has to be found by, this was a project 2 or 3 years, or even 4 or 5 years ago, founded by
private,
France.
Yeah.
Not private, and France wanted to fund this project and then to make something which is called Maison Senghor. It's a very good idea, like Maison Médicis or something like this, Maison Senghor in Gorée Island. And the project was to put the collection there, my collection, and also the collection of Senghor, which will come from France again there, and putting there. But, in Africa, sometimes things, even if we say it's simple, if funding is there, you have politics.
It takes longer time.
It takes longer time, and politics is there, so we have to wait.
But it happens. Yeah, before we monopolize and continue our trialogue, I would like to open to the floor if any one of you has comments or any specific questions to our whole panelists. Yes, please. Just wait for the mic and just say very briefly who you are.
My name is Giles Peppiott. I'm Director of Contemporary African Art at Bonhams. I would just like to ask both of you, really. You say that you like to interact with the artists and meet them. Are you concerned in any way how that interaction might affect the work they produce?
Can I say, I mean, I'm not, I'm, perhaps this is an arrogant answer, I'm not concerned particularly about my interaction with the artists. I think you raise a broader question there, and that is, and a controversial question, which is the interaction between the international art community, international art establishment, and African artists. Because, I mean, I have a fascinating debate going with one of the best gallerists in the world, who I think, his argument is that any artist who doesn't utilize the tools of the international establishment isn't an artist worth being interested in. Mine's about the opposite of that, which is that for me, artists are most interesting if they are quite particular and come from a particular place and reflect. So, I mean, if that's the kind of person you say, I think there is, you know, but also you've got to be really careful, because what I say could quite easily come across as being, you know, kind of incredibly patronising, and let's kind of keep African artists where they are, but not intended obviously to mean that at all. No, because I mean, I don't think that my relationship with an artist has any influence on their practice at all.
I really agree with this. This is a key point. The question that you raised, it's a question that I keep also have in mind when I go and see people who have been in the light. That's why I say light and shadow. And as I said also, like Robert said, interaction of local people with, let's say, local artists, I don't think they made any difference in their work. You cannot influence their work. But what's really, and this is a key point, if you look, let's say on the Senegalese artist, if you look which artist has been under the light and has been selected by international critics until now, you find, for instance, Ousmane Sow or Mustafa Dime, people who make sculptures mainly. In the 1980s, 1990s, Senegal was not ground for sculptors. You had only few sculptors in Senegal. But when these two big artists had been put under the light and they had success, what happened in Senegal in the last decade, that many people entered the field in the sculpture, and you had many people like Ndarilo, Mamadi Seydi, many people consider this media as something which is very interesting in order to have a passport for international markets. This is how influence can be made. And it can be made also, many people are making now installation, because when you go, if you have to go to, let's say, Africa Remix, if you look Africa Remix, which had been made in 2006, what has been selected from Senegal is selected videos, installation, and now what is true, what is authentic is there. These people are playing with the market. That's normal at the end. They want also their part of the light. They want to be part of the international game and not being considered only as local artists. Is this changing their way of making things? No, perhaps it is making this more broader and making something which is richer. But this question is always there. So that's why I said some people are in the shadow. They're not looking for light. They make authentic art also.
I don't think we will have the time to get to this issue of authenticity. We talked about it the day before, and I think it's quite interesting that especially you, Bassam, talk about authentic art, but I will take another person, and I know that there are a lot of people out there waiting to get into this room, and yes, please.
My name's Lara Pawson. I'm a journalist. Just to take up from both your points, but I suppose your point principally, Robert. There's been a lot of talk this week. This isn't a new subject, but there's been a lot of talk. There's been people writing about it. The idea that the art market inevitably affects artists and what they create, be they African or Londoners or, you know, wherever they may be from, Dakar or Paris. That there's a need. In fact, I heard one of the gallerists upstairs saying that artists need to, if you like, they use the word brand themselves. If you're not, it makes us all wince. But you know, it's been discussed a lot. There's no art without money, or whatever you know. There's a piece of work on the wall is a piece of money. People have different views on this. But that once there is lots of money involved, and once artists have perhaps an in to the international art market, does it concern both of you, or what is your view on this argument that people are making that it affects the art that people will create? It does have an effect whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be naive to suppose that it doesn't. But you know. And perhaps I am naive in hoping that, you know, the majority of artists and the majority of genuine artists, and I won't go on about authenticity, you know, don't make work for a market. It goes the other way around. I mean, they make, you know, work that is true to themselves, and then there are various ways in which they find a market. But, artists have to live. I mean, I'm clearly not against, the commercial dimension of the art world. I mean, I've lived in it. I mean, if I were, I'd be guilty of my own sin. I mean, but I think that, without naming, countries or continents, I mean, there have been films in the past where artists have very specifically and deliberately and in large quantity, created work that they knew would appeal to international collectors. And that does happen, but it doesn't last. I mean, my own, again, I'm a terrible optimist. I always think that everything's going to turn out right on the night, and I don't really believe that lasts very long. So yeah, it has an influence, and filthy money, filthy lucre. It's it's there, but I think that the artist can rise above it.
Well, thank you. We unfortunately have to wrap up here because we are running a little bit late and the next panel is waiting. I would have to ask you to leave the room and come back again if you want to be part of the next panel. Thank you.